Good evening, everybody. And my name is Julian, and I'm very glad to be hanging out and chatting tonight. A little bit about me: I am a composer and sound designer here in Winnipeg. I'm currently working at Complex Games as their audio coordinator on their Warhammer Chaos Gate project, but I'm also an avid game jammer and have done music for a few and sound for a few other projects. And yeah, I did a jazz music degree at Brandon University, and then at the California Institute of the Arts down in the States. So my background is actually in live performance, and then I've kind of been meandering and settling into game audio as of late. So, in addition to that, yeah, I like games, I like audio, I like game jams, and I belong to the community of creative people for whom every part of the creative process is a struggle. So I thought I would give this talk called Getting Past the Creative Block 10 Strategies for Overcoming Creative Block in Video Game Audio. Um, as a way to hopefully share some of my um, struggles throughout the creative process, particularly in games and in situations where there isn't a lot of time to give for a particular project. So I constantly encounter creative blocks, and it's always at the moment that I most want ideas to flow, like a game jam. It usually happens when I'm overwhelmed with options, or I have lofty ideas of what I want to get done, or I don't have enough information on what I'm doing. So, in this talk, I just want to share 10 strategies that help me set my own expectations and generate ideas so I can stay on task and get everything that I want to get done in the jam. So, these will be somewhat audio centric, but hopefully, there's some crossover for other disciplines. Number one is establish the minimum viable product. So, the first thing I want to know when I'm in a jam is when will I be done the jam? My oh, let's just add this one more thing instinct is very strong, and I need to place some strict boundaries on what I'm going to do in this jam. So I like to start off by making a list of everything that could possibly be in the game, like if you had all the time in the world, and then start picking out the elements that absolutely need to be in. That's my minimum viable product, the bare minimum of what I want to be done in the jam. And if I get to all that, then I'm done and I can go to sleep peacefully. Then I identify some extras from the original big list as some stretch goals, some would be nices if there's extra time. That way, right from the start, I've defined what it is I'm going to do. And for me personally, more importantly, I know what I'm not going to do. And I've also scratched that one last thing itch. So it's all out of my system. So I'm not bothered by it at all. No way during the jam. Not. So number two, I like to pick the easiest task first. So after our list of assets is made, it's time to get started. But where to start? This can be an overwhelming decision. And for me, it can be tempting to dive into the more challenging tasks first. So when I'm not sure, I like to pick the task that seems easiest or most familiar to me. It can be a nice warm up and a early success experience and get the creative juices flowing. This is also effective for days when you don't really feel like working but still want to get something done. For me, I like to break down tasks into like very basic steps so I can feel good about taking at least some kind of action forward. So, like making a new empty Ableton project is still a step farther than having no project, or maybe a project loaded with instruments is still further than an empty project. Dabbling with a melody could lead to an idea to explore more deeply later, versus if you never sat down. Uh, I tend, or sometimes when I think like, oh, I'm not in the mood to do anything, I'll just wait until I have lots of energy and then I'll just crank through stuff. But kind of the older that I get, the more I realize that like moving forward for me usually means taking a small step every day versus kind of waiting for the perfect time to get it all done. Number three, use the game universe for inspiration. My biggest moment of block comes when I start a new music track or a sound effect. I get overwhelmed with possibilities, and I need to create some way to narrow my options. So I look to the game that we're making for inspiration. Dive into the universe, the setting, the characters, the art, the gameplay, and then I like to link musical or audio qualities to it, like concrete sort of things. For example, if I'm making a piece of music for like a space game, I'll list the qualities of the scene, and tie musical elements to that. So if the setting was an asteroid belt, maybe it would be a dense track to reflect all the asteroids in the that are close by. If it's chase scene, maybe the tempo would be fast and maybe in a minor key because it's a tense experience. If the game is set in a cyberpunk future, I might use a lot of synthesizers, but maybe it's a pixel art style, so everything would be lo-fi. But by drawing on these elements of the universe of your game, you've all of a sudden have a framework to get started, and it's directly related to all the source material. Number four, use motives and themes to create consistency. You can use the previous strategy on a larger scale by using musical themes to create consistency. A theme is any recurring musical concept attached to an element of the game. Commonly, these are melodies, but it doesn't need to end there. It can be a rhythm, style, or an instrument. Maybe that same synthesizer from the Cyberpunk game comes back in the title screen and the credits. Using material not only saves you time creating new content, but also creates consistencies in Unity, leaving the player feel like everything belongs. The same is relevant to sound design. Using similar processing effects can save you time and create a cohesive audio treatment. This also extends to keeping your mix consistent between tracks for a project. So something that I've been doing recently is I like to like save as a project, just take out all the MIDI and audio from it, but keep all the levels and your effects chains the same. So that way you carry over a lot of the same sonic consistencies, which also makes your work sound unified. Number five, if it doesn't exist, make it up. Sometimes, especially in jam games, there isn't a lot of game universe lore to actually draw from because there just wasn't time to create it. So, if what I'm making is feeling a little generic, sometimes I'll make up some kind of backstory to whatever it is I'm working on. Like if it's a sword, maybe it has hidden magical properties. That might lead me to adding some subtle extra sound design effects that make it feel unique and interesting. Nobody really needs to know about your rationale, but it can serve as a breadcrumb and lead to some unique results. This can be especially useful in sound design when there's often a build up and a release to an ability. Like I'm thinking of an RPG spell where you like charge something up, maybe you're charging an ice spell and then releasing it out. So inventing some kind of narrative to what's going on for that process could help provide a direction to the sound design. Number six, fall back on what you know. So sometimes I'll be halfway through something and just not know what is supposed to come next. Maybe I've placed a lot of pressure on myself to make something I've never made before. And in those moments when nothing seems good enough, I find it sometimes best to actually pull out some old tricks that I know will be successful. While it feels like I'm backing down to a challenge, using something familiar can be a stepping stone to get past your block and then lead you to the innovative places you were hoping to get to anyway. For me, that might mean using a harmonic progression I know will work, some instruments I know will blend well together, melodies that might be a bit cliche but are still catchy, or using similar processes to making sounds that I've done in the past. Interestingly, uh, every time I return to an old crutch, I tend to approach it with more experience than the last time I used it. So, in a weird way, even though I feel like I'm kind of leaning on something that I always do, I'm growing also. Number seven, knowing when good enough is good enough. You probably won't have time or maybe even interest to make everything to the best of your ability because that takes time and time is in short supply during a jam and even a slow jam. Thus, it's important to know when something is good enough so you can move on to the next task. In my opinion, for game audio, it's more, yeah, game audio is more than the sum of its parts. A fully realized audio treatment made with assets that are good enough creates a greater effect than just having one great piece of music. I feel like getting to those extra features on your original asset list helps make a jam game feel bigger than a jam game because people aren't always expecting features that are beyond the minimal viable product. I tend to follow the rule that the last 20% of the work takes 80% of the time. So if I get to if something I'm delivering gets to my 80%, probably the intention of what I'm trying to make is coming through. And really that's good enough for me in the context of a jam. I also think about what in the game will be heard the most and budget my time and energy accordingly. Can I get away with a 1 minute track instead of a 3 minute track? Or maybe I'll spend more time focusing on juicy sound effects and maybe not music. So, assessing how your audio will be heard is a good way to optimize your energy and get maximum effect for your work. Number 8, make it interactive. Another way I overcome block is by thinking of ways of including interactive elements to the audio. So, interactive audio is audio that changes based on player action. If you're making a piece of music, maybe 2 or 3 extra layers fade in on certain conditions. Like maybe if you start losing health, some of the music layers fade out, or um, if you climb higher, more layers fade in to reflect the change in your height. So if you're making sound effects, maybe you can make a few different variations by tweaking some of the parameters to your effects. And then when you export them, you just trigger them to play back randomly. These are fairly straightforward ways to make your game feel polished. And it doesn't actually, or while it doesn't actually take you that much extra time. And it might inspire some new processes that get ideas going along the way. A pretty easy way to do this with music is to take your track and to export your melody separate from the rest. So muting your melody makes your track a lot more ambient, which could be really good for low key gameplay moments. Then maybe when the action picks up, you fade in that melody, or something that is effective as well as you use the melody version for the title track. And then during the gameplay moments, you just mute it. In general, just milking your one piece of music by extracting different parts of it and using it in various contexts can save you time in a pinch. Number 9, get your audio in the game early. Once your audio asset is done, get it into the game ASAP to hear it in context. This will tell you right away if any changes need to be made. With music, it's handy to put it in before you spend too much time in it, so you can hear if you're on the right track. For sound effects, certain sounds will, in theory, seem like they fit, but it's only when you see them in context will you know for sure. And the earlier that you get those sounds in, the more you'll realize if they're extremely grating and need to be swapped out or not. To the programmers in the house, it's super helpful when this implementation and triggering is prioritized early on in the jam, so you can really get this iteration process going early on. Number 10, have other people listen to your work. Over the course of a jam, my ears get tired and I stop hearing my work objectively. Getting a fresh pair of ears, whether it's folks on your team or friends, will provide you with that fresh perspective. And because no top 10 list is ever 10 points, number 11, finally, your game is going to evolve and your ideas are going to evolve, and maybe that original asset list minimum viable product has changed as well. That's all fine, that's good, and that is normal because making art is a collaborative and changing process. So please be open, or I would encourage you rather to be open to modifying, discarding, and adapting, and enjoying the creative process. So, with that, that's all I had to say. So happy jamming. Thanks again for having me. Thank you, Jackie, for that great talk. I learned so much. And thanks for Dan for inviting me.